Today I have Farouk A, Peru, writer and Islamologist, to talk to us about Hadi Awang's Hudud Bill. Farouk, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, last week, social media was abuzz with talk about Hadi's Hudud Bill. On Thursday, I believe it happened. Now, would you like to tell us what is happening in Malaysia?
Well, Abdul Hadi Awang is the president of PAS, and he is currently introducing a private member's bill in Parliament known as RUU 355, which intends to amend the Hudud Act of 1965.
RUU in English means Amendment to Act 355. Would you like to explain what that's all about?
Sure. Well, initially we had a ceiling limit for the Sharia Courts, and the ceiling limit are fines no more than $5,000, 5,000 RM, whipping no more than 6 strokes of the rotan, and jail no more than 3 years. So what Hadi intended to do, the first time this came round, he intended to make all the punishments unlimited with the exception of the death penalty. So they can mete out punishments anything short of the death penalty. But recently, his most recent attempt, he has watered down RUU 355 to have a ceiling limit of $100,000 fine. So that's 20 times more than the original. Whipping 100 times, so that's almost 20 times more than the original number. And jail 30 years, which is 10 times more than the original number.
But what are these crimes for?
It's not been stated. I mean, I have looked and asked around, but these are the ceiling limits. And I believe that they are themselves not sure as to which punishment fits which crime.
Why is he doing this?
In my opinion, I don't believe that it is for anything to do strictly with Sharia. I believe that this is a political maneuver on their part in order to drum up support, possibly before the GE14 takes place.
Drum up support for?
From the Malay Muslim majority.
For both PAS and UMNO, or for UMNO alone?
Well, it could be that because UMNO gives support, it could be also for UMNO, and PAS could give endorsement to UMNO, because UMNO has been very supportive in this regard. But it could also be for PAS themselves. You know, PAS themselves did not do very well in the last GE anyway.
Now, this Hudud Bill, it came up last May. And it came out again this time, last Thursday.
Yeah.
Could this be a distraction?
I believe it is. I mean, there are many things going on in the country at the moment. And I personally don't see how the bill can be passed, especially with Sabah and Sarawak simply not supporting such a maneuver. So yeah, I think it can be a distraction. But more so than that, Hadi has decided to defer this to March next year. Could there be some snap polls during that time? We don't know. Yeah,
but also my analysis shows that last May, when this happened, when he called for the Hudud Bill, Azalina Osman Said, the minister in the Prime Minister's department, she moved it up to the top of the queue in Parliament.
She did.
And if you remember at that time, there was the Good Star exposure by Wall Street Journal.
Perfect timing. Perfect timing indeed.
Something to hide bad news,
Yeah.
And this time round, what did we have last week? The Bersih 5 movement, and then Maria Chin was taken, put into detention. And then suddenly, lo and behold, again, the Hudud Bill.
Timing is everything, you know. In the political theatre, the nation's attention, when it's focused on something the government does not want us to focus on, these things arise, and inevitably we make a big noise about it and it dies down.
And we ignore the real issues.
We ignore the real issues.
Right, so perhaps we can concentrate on this Hudud thing for now. Why the move towards a full-blown Sharia?
Well, I mean, this is something which PAS has been historically known for. Now, in our first general election, 2 years before the independence itself, the alliance, Parti Perikatan, which consisted of UMNO, MIC and MCA, they had won 51 out of 52 seats. But the last remaining seat went to PAS. So PAS had already been present in the nation's political consciousness since that time, and that's before independence.
Yeah, but they've never denied that they're not an Islamic party, have they?
They have not denied that, and what they have done in certain political circumstances is that they have downplayed the Islamic State manifesto. In 2000 and just after the millennium, they began to downplay that when they joined up with Barisan Alternative. And then Barisan Alternative broke up in 2002. And in 2004, unfortunately, the opposition floundered a little bit. Mm-hmm. Came back in 2008, the tsunami of 2008.
Okay.
And after the tsunami, Pakatan Raya was formed. And if you look at PAS's rhetoric during that period, the Islamic State manifesto was really downplayed. They were saying that Islam is really all about a welfare state. Of course, they never elaborated on what the welfare state is about. And when the next general election came, by that time, the Pakatan Raya had already been disbanded, and PAS was back to its Islamic State rhetoric.
Okay, now PAS has had alliances with other parties to be part of the opposition. Mm-hmm. Why haven't they always worked out?
Well, you see, the thing is, these alliances, they are based on political expediency. If they join hands with DAP is headed in one direction towards a secular state, and PAS is headed towards an Islamic state. So that is the polar opposites of one another. How can they cooperate? Obviously, the more conservative hardline elements in PAS will be driving towards an Islamic state, and you'll have people like the late Karpal Singh saying, "Oh, that's all my dead body." You see, so it can never really work.
So, do you think that they are deceiving their partners?
I believe that PAS, it's either one of two things. One is that they are extremely incompetent at understanding their own ideology, or two, yes, they are being deceptive.
Why can't PAS be trusted?
Simply because if they had a certain goal and they made some progress, they will change their rhetoric, like this welfare state business. This welfare state business was never explicated. They never said exactly how the finances of this welfare state will take place, simply because they're not required to. You see, it was just a nice little cushy thing for people to hear, to think, oh, okay, well, PAS is no longer the hardliners they once were.
And we believe them.
Some of us do, I suppose.
Now, what is the notion of the Islamic State?
Indeed, I mean, this is, I think, a very vital question. Muslims often hark back to the Islamic State in a very romanticized way. The Islamic State was originally a city-state, which was headed by Prophet Muhammad. So what happened was Prophet Muhammad was doing, historically speaking, he was doing his preaching in Mecca. And after 13 years, the two main tribes of Medina invited him to become their leader. And so he went, he made the exodus to Medina, and from there he formed the first city-state of Islam. And that is what people think is the Islamic State. It's an Islamic state. It is a state which is run by Sharia laws, although that's not very clear from the Sahifa of Medina, the Constitution of Medina.
And if I remember correctly, in 2003, former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad declared Malaysia an Islamic state. Do you remember
I
that?
I do.
Which confused a lot of people, didn't it?
It did. And here's the thing though, people must understand the difference between an Islamic state in the technical sense of the word and an Islamic state in a colloquial sense of the word. Now, if you say a state is Islamic, you could easily mean that the majority of its population are Muslims. If you say Islamic State in the technical sense of the word, you must be referring to ISIS or even Saudi Arabia, but certainly not Malaysia. Malaysia has never ever fit that description, the technical description of an Islamic State.
Now, can the Islamic State work in this day and age?
The Islamic State has never really worked. Not even then, not probably far away from. It would be even more difficult for it to run now. In those days, what happened was, after about 10 years after the Prophet's death, nepotism began to creep in. The third and fourth caliph were killed by those who were dissatisfied with their rule. And then a monarchy took over. And that monarchy enriched themselves. And that monarchy was thrown out by a bloody revolution. And that the subsequent monarchy began to decay after a few hundred years. And they were then deposed by the Mongols. So it's always been an unstable history. To say the Islamic State has existed from the time of the Prophet up till 1924, that's just a myth.
1924? Why?
The fall of the last Ottoman Caliph.
Okay. Now, you talked about after the Prophet's death, and then there was nepotism and all those things creeping in. Sounds a bit like modern day Malaysia.
Indeed. I mean, human beings, they follow a similar pattern of behavior. I mean, there are people who are really passionate about their cause, and they may establish a strong justice system and so on. And then people who come after them will not have the same strength of conviction, and they will fall into these kinds of behavior. I mean, now, these days we have the religious class who have no ambitions to really establish social justice. For them, Islam really is about the call to prayer must be heard 5 times a day, and they must be given their fair share of the religious pie. And, they get to open their schools and have their religious economy. That's Islam for them. There is no real evolution of society going on.
So why can't the learned scholars and Islamologists like you educate these people?
Well, I mean, we are always in a process of learning. I mean, my own understanding of Islam is based on my own education. But unfortunately, in places like Malaysia, we are very hard pressed to penetrate the mindset of the Malay Muslim. I think the Malay Muslims have been made very resistant to people who wish to change the status quo.
Now, coming back to the amendment to Act 355, is this really Sharia in its true form?
Indeed, I mean, this is a very vital question. Sharia in its true form culminates in the Hudud set of laws. For example, in the proper classical Islamo-fascist state, the law for apostasy is death. In this amended Hudud Bill, the punishment could be just $100,000 in fines, or it could be 30 years in prison, or it could be 100 whippings. So it's not really Sharia. It's really a way of giving oneself emotional comfort that one has fulfilled God's duties, as it were.
Why do they want to amend it? Why can't they enforce Sharia law?
Because that would be against the Constitution, the secular federal Constitution.
Yeah, well, what he's doing is against the Constitution, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is, because we are all equal, or we should be all equal under the law. But with this, the Malay Muslim has become tremendously disadvantaged in the eyes of the law. If he is caught, for example, in close proximity, khalwat, and there are people who actually go around finding these people, they call them the matskodings, yeah? If he's caught in that situation, he may be fined up to $100,000. We don't know how much yet. But that would certainly give him tremendous problems in this day and age, where the economy is squeezing. People are not having enough disposable income as they used to. And now you have to start paying fines for possible crimes, which, you could be caught in as a matter of accident rather than on purpose.
Yeah, but last week, Deputy Prime Minister Zahid Hamidi was saying, non-Muslims, you don't have anything to worry. And on Tuesday, he also had a meeting with only Muslim MPs. And what do you think about that?
Well, Zahid has certainly gone the past way with this. The reason being, Hadi Awang actually gave a warning to non-Muslim MPs not to interfere with Muslim affairs. He said, please don't be like the Christian governor of Jakarta, Ahok.
Okay.
And he's saying, this is just our issue, Muslim issue, you have nothing to do with it. This is utterly false. But before I tell you why it's false, let me just say that in a multiracial, multi-religious society, to say this to people and you tell them, look, you're not affected by this, that is incredibly, I think, separatist, very divisive. Simply because we are all living in the same environment. So whatever happens to us, the Malay Muslims, obviously will be felt by others because we are all part of the rakyat. But Hadi, this betrays his mindset because he sees us as an apartheid society. In the same way South Africa was during the apartheid regime. He sees us in that way. And on top of that, what he says, that non-Muslims won't be affected, this is not true. Even now, you will see that the religious department, they have no problem at all encroaching into non-Muslim spaces. If, let's say, you have children and you divorce your spouse and he converts to Islam, they have no problem taking the children away from you.
As in Indira Gandhi's case?
Indira Gandhi's case.
Although
that has had a positive outcome, the children will be returned to her, but it did happen. You see, and when we give the Sharia courts added power, then they will act with added complacency.
Yeah, just now you were talking about moral policing and people being hounded, but this only happens to the lower income brackets, don't they? They don't raid the 5-star hotels where all the elites are having their bit of fun.
Indeed.
Yeah, and then the other thing, of course, they attack the transgenders.
Exactly.
Aren't they all God's creatures too?
Exactly, and this, I must say, is it is a great sign of the utter lack of education these people have. And I say that with the greatest compassion. I'm not trying to demean anyone here, but these people, they actually call transgendered women as cross-dressers. Cross-dressing is what you do if you affect the clothes of the opposite sex. These people do not feel that they are males, hence they are dressing according to how they feel. And the transgender phenomenon is a medically documented phenomenon. It's not something which these people made up. And the religious authorities have no right to question their judgment. They don't have any proof. But this is unfortunately the patriarchal nature of Sharia law.
But then people like Hadi or the conservatives will say, we're referring to the book.
I would like to see where. Because the Quran nowhere defines male or female behavior. This is something which is socially constructed. And on top of that, in medieval Islamic societies, there were people who did not fit the gender binary. It's only people like Hadi and his ilk and Jakim and those guys who are very one-dimensional in their outlook.
Yeah. So why are Islamic punishments very harsh?
The first thing I think we need to ask is, are they really Islamic punishments? Let's take this apostasy law, for example. The apostasy law is a very major concern with Islamofascists like Hadi and so on. They don't want people to leave Islam. But if you look at the Quran has repeated at least 5 or 6 times that being a believer is something which is up to you. If you will to become a believer, you can become one. If you don't have to become one. It is not the prerogative of the state to force you to become a believer.
So you have the freedom to choose.
You have the freedom to choose. Hence, I cannot call what Hadi proposes as Islamic. I call it Islamofascist. It's fascist in nature, but he claims it's Islamic. I'm not going to disclaim the Islamic part, but I'll say it's fascist. So I don't believe that it's Islamic. I believe it's Islamofascist.
So why are so few Muslim scholars or Islamologists countering Hadi's statement?
Well, in Malaysia, we are not given the airtime as much as these people. We'll never appear in mainstream media or mainstream TV channels where we can have debates with this guy. If we did, I don't believe that they'll be able to defend their case.
Okay, now why do you think PAS focuses on Islamic laws?
Well, I think this is a matter of if you're unable to do the bigger task, you do the smaller task. You see, the interesting thing about the Quran has 6,236 verses. Out of this number of verses, I would say a generous estimate is of verses pertaining to law. I would say a generous estimate is 100 verses. Although most people would say about 50. Well, let's say it's 100.
That's a small fraction.
That's a small fraction. It's 2%. But yet it makes up for 100% of past rhetoric. Why? Because they are unable to focus on anything else. When issues regarding actual governance crops up, PAS utterly fails. Proof of this was in 2014 during the floods. PAS was caught with its pants down. It was simply unprepared. It needed help from the federal government, from NGOs, etc. Why? Simply because they are an Islamic party by name. But when it comes to actual Islamic policies as per the Quran, I don't believe they're following it. Because the Quran has a concept called taqwa. And taqwa, if you look at the etymology of taqwa, it refers to being preserving of oneself. Did PAS take any measures to preserve the state from any such disasters? No, they did not.
But they could argue that they don't get federal funding. So they are, no money.
Well, federal funding is one thing, but they have their own internal funding, don't they? I mean, obviously they need to run the state somehow.
Yeah, but not enough for flood barriers, and perhaps that is why they have illegal logging to get extra income.
Illegal logging, and this is another thing which we need to ask. If the Quran tells us about the environment, it always talks about the heavens and the earth, the crops, and how God is the nourisher and sustainer of these things. Why did PAS go against nature by logging, to such an excessive level? Simply because, you see, the Islam which they preach, if it is Islam at all, is really about a set of rules and rituals. It is not really about policy. It is not really about philosophy. It does not really look at the environment and stuff like that. It's very narrow in its scope. I'll give you a quote by Nick Abdu. Nick Abdu is one of the rising stars of PAS, and he makes the most ludicrous statements.
Tok Guru's son.
Tok Guru's son, indeed. Now he said, and I'll have to quote in Malay, he says, Negara kita rosak kerana rasuah. Our country is broken because of corruption. But to rebuild it, it's not just with hunting down those people who are corrupted. It's not just with that, he's saying. Build the country towards Islam, and corruption will disappear when Islam is established. Can you see his mindset there? He's saying corruption will disappear when Islam is established. Actually, if you go against those people who are corrupted, then you will have peace, and that is Islam. But he sees Islam as something else from the world. He sees Islam, or as everybody goes to the mosque, then yes, you'll have you'll have a corruption-free country. It doesn't work in that way. Last month or so, there has been the Auditor General made some kind of investigation about people who got funding to carpet their mosque, and instead they pocketed the funds.
Yeah, there are allegations. Of corruption in mosques.
Exactly.
Totaling in the millions.
Yeah. So you see, this guy, he's postulating some kind of solution which has absolutely nothing to do with the problem. He's so out of touch with reality. It's unbelievable.
And in a neighbouring state, Terengganu, they're now saying that if you don't go and pray on Fridays, they might fine you and jail you.
This is it. And if Sharia Courts are given added power, then they can fine you up to 30 years, or jail you up to 30 years,
But the incredible thing is, nations around the world with Hudud, they're not successful nations,
no,
are they?
They're not.
So these learned men in Kelantan or in PAS, don't they read?
You see, the thing is, the classical Islamic education is very, very removed from the world. It is all about memorizing ancient texts. There are no discussions, no dissent. You memorize them and you regurgitate them. can you solve any global problems? No, not really. I mean, the world was in a global recession from 2008 up to perhaps 2015. Did we see any of the ulama step forward and say, okay, well, here is our solution, and we're very sure we can bring you out of the recession? No, we don't see anything like that. They're still thinking that immorality is the cause of everything that's wrong in the world. In Kelantan, I mean, they made it such an issue that men and women have to queue separately. What on earth does that have to do with our well-being? So we really have to ask these questions.
So what's your alternative then?
I mean, I personally believe that we need a secular state. We need to phase out these Sharia courts. Ultimately, we need to reach a policy of one law for everyone. And I think many Muslim women would agree with me because they have been the victims of oppressive policies of Sharia.
Do you think Malays want hudud?
I think Malays are in a dilemma. Part of them feel that, okay, if I say I don't want hudud, then the ustad is going to say, kamu ni kape. This really worries them. Yet another part sees that actually they are living, well, without hudud. They don't really need hudud. So that kind of makes them alienated from the faith. And what I think is, they should read about the faith more. They should see that 2% of the Quran is about laws. What's the other 98% about? It's about building self, building society, helping to build a better world. And all this for the sake of God. You see, so we are not becoming less religious if we reject hudud. In fact, in my opinion, we're becoming more religious.
But it's not just their fault, is it? It's the fault of the Islamic scholars, the ustads, for not telling them the right, or putting them along the right path.
The Islamic scholars have a certain agenda. And that agenda is to build a segment of human activity separate from the world. And that segment, they call it ibadah, or worship. If you look at the Quranic concept of ibadah, ibadah is something which is total. How we run our lives. If we are corrupted, and our nation is very high in terms of corruption, if we are corrupted, then we are, according to my understanding of the Quran, we are not worshipping God. We are worshipping ourselves, our lusts. See, so we've taken money which is meant for the rakyat and we have appropriated it for ourselves. That's not Islam anymore. Yet we don't see any of the ustads and so on condemning this thing. Why? Why don't they come forward and say, look, we're not going to work for a government which is corrupt? You see?
So what's your message to Hadi Awang then?
My message is stop playing around with the faith. If you are sincere about establishing the deen of Islam, the first thing you should do is to eradicate poverty among all Malaysians regardless of race and religion. If you do that, if you work towards doing that, then I believe that you are working for Islam. Right now you're not working for Islam. Right now you are working in the political theatre and you are trying to distract the rakyat from actually seeing the truth of what's going on.
But isn't this this so-called secret pact with Najib that UMNO Baru is given power and Hadi gets his hudud in Kelantan?
That could be the case. That could be the case. It could be that UMNO has sold the Malays down the river. Yeah.
So it's all about votes.
Well, they have to keep
power
power somehow. They have to keep power somehow, and unfortunately, they don't mind selling the Malay Muslims down the river, because once this thing comes into play, once you have a muscular hudud system, ultimately it will lead to a Taliban-like state, because these people will be thirsty for more and more power, and their thirst is unlimited.
Message to the Malay masses?
Message to the Malay masses: open the Quran and read it for yourself. See how much of the Quran is about laws. Then see how much of it is about your self-reflection, self-betterment, your ethics, your morality. See how much of the Quran is about the chosen race, the Ketuanan Melayu. Absolutely nothing is about that. And why don't you reject that then? So I mean, you want to be more Muslim, yet you're keeping these racist policies. You see, so these kind of things, we are rejecting or forgetting about the fundamentals of the Quran, and here we are thinking about laws. It's inexplicable, really.
Thank you very much, Farouk. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Farouk, the things we discussed about Hadi's Hudud Bill is from your point of view, writer and Islamologist. What do you think if we invite a past politician or even Hadi Awang himself for an interview with us?
I think that's more than fair. I mean, they should be given the opportunity to defend their point of view. And what if I misrepresent them? They should be here themselves to defend what they have to say, and maybe they can prove me wrong, and I'm quite happy to be proven wrong.
Okay, so if anybody has access to a past politician or to Hadi himself, please email us. Thank you very much.